Zuri, tell me you didn't.
I transferred the company into a trust. While you were unconscious in that hospital bed.
You did what? How could you betray me like this?
She can't touch a single dollar. Not one contract. Nothing.
That was my decision to make.
Dad, she had the paperwork ready the day after you signed.
What? The day after? Why didn't you tell me? 2 years, Zuri. You let me live in that marriage for 2 years without saying a word.
Because Mom told me not to.
What?
Evelyn Hopper Kane had been dead for 12 years.
She was still the smartest person in the building. But what was inside that folder Zuri slid across the table was going to make everything William had already found look like nothing. She had a photograph of his daughter. Don't move. William Kane was 45 years old. He owned a cold chain logistics company worth more than $14 million. And he still believed, genuinely believed, that the right kind of love could heal any wound a man carried. That belief nearly cost him everything. He found out on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, in a house he had paid for in full, while his wife was 300 miles away in Charlotte at a professional conference. He wasn't looking for anything. He was repainting a room. By the time the storm broke that evening, his hands were trembling so badly he could barely grip the laptop. And the name that came out of him? Low. Involuntary. Like something pulled loose from deep inside his chest. Wasn't Essie's name at all. It was Evelyn's. His first wife. Gone 12 years. And somehow, she had still found a way to be in the room. The morning started the way his Saturdays used to, back before everything got complicated. William was up before 7, nothing unusual for a man who had spent his late 20s driving overnight freight routes in a leased truck with a cracked windshield, building Kane family cold logistics, one pharmaceutical contract at a time. Out of an office the size of a walk-in closet on Moreland Avenue, he made his coffee black. 2 cups, no sugar, same as always. He pulled on his old khaki work pants, the ones with the fleck of paint on the left knee from the time Evelyn talked him into helping redo the kitchen back in 2012. He still hadn't thrown them out. Some things a man doesn't change, no matter what his accountant drives. The house sat on Springdale Road in Morningside, one of Atlanta's older residential neighborhoods, where oak trees lean over the sidewalks and the front porches still get used. William had bought it 4 years ago, shortly after marrying Essie. Beautiful house, wide porch, good bones. The realtor said that. And he had believed her, the way he was in those early years. Inclined to believe what people told him when the telling made him feel less alone. Essie had left Friday morning for Charlotte, polished as always, rolling a carry-on that probably cost more than William's first truck payment. She kissed him on the cheek at the door. "I'll be back Sunday, baby. Don't forget the gutters." Then she was gone, heels on the front steps, into the waiting car. He didn't think twice about it. That was the particular gift Essie possessed. She made ordinary moments feel permanent. She was 35, always immaculate, warm in exactly the right measure, careful never to give too much or too little. She had walked into William's life 3 years after he buried Evelyn, and she had walked in like she belonged there, like she had always been there. His best friend Marcus had introduced them at a charity gala in Buckhead. "Will, you need to meet this woman." Marcus had said it wearing that easy college roommate grin. "She's everything, man." He wasn't wrong. That was still the part that made William's jaw tighten when he thought about it. But that Saturday morning, he wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about paint, Essie's home office, The small room at the back of the house she used for remote consulting work had been showing water stains near the baseboard since August. William had promised to fix it. A quiet weekend alone was the right time to follow through. He started with the trim, the way Evelyn always said you were supposed to. Evelyn had been the one who knew how to do things correctly, quietly, precisely, always 3 steps ahead of a situation. Their daughter Zuri had inherited that quality. At 26, Zuri could look at her father and seem to know exactly what he was choosing not to say. It had always slightly unnerved him. It also made him immeasurably proud. He had kept one of Evelyn's paintings in that back office, a spring landscape of Piedmont Park, soft greens and the faint shimmer of the lake across the grass. Painted on a Sunday afternoon in the spring of 2014, a few months before Evelyn got sick. When Essie redecorated the room after moving in, she hadn't removed it. A contractor she'd hired had told her the panel directly behind the frame was structural, load-bearing, not worth disturbing. She'd accepted that, moved the painting 2 inches to the right, and left it. William had been quietly grateful. He told himself it meant she respected what had come before. He lifted the frame carefully off the wall. The thin wooden panel behind it shifted. Not much, just a fraction of an inch, the way a door moves when there is air pressure behind it. But William felt it immediately. He set the painting down on the floor and pressed his fingertips flat against the wall. There was a seam, clean, deliberate, cut by someone who had taken the time to do it with care. He pulled the panel open. The hidden compartment was deep enough to hold a small wooden box. Inside the box, 3 passports, a folded document, and a burgundy-red USB drive. All 3 passports carried Essie's photograph. All 3 bore different names. Outside, the storm that had been building since noon finally broke over the roof. Rain came in sheets. Lightning cracked somewhere over Ponce de Leon Avenue, close enough to flicker the lights. William sat down on the floor, slowly, the way a man sits when his legs decide they are done. He looked at the passports. He looked at the USB drive. He looked at Evelyn's painting leaning against the baseboard beside him. Her careful brushwork, her soft, unhurried greens. He whispered her name. Evelyn? Then he picked up his laptop and walked to the garage. What was on that USB drive, and how long had someone been watching William Kane from inside his own home? William sat in his pickup truck in the closed garage with the engine off. The rain hammered the roof. He plugged the USB drive into his laptop. The screen lit up his face in the dark, the only light in the whole space. The drive opened to a single folder. Inside, video files, spreadsheets, and a subfolder labeled Assets, Kane. He opened the videos first. The first clip was dated 3 weeks after their wedding, shot from a slightly elevated wide angle. The perspective of a small camera positioned above eye level. It took William a moment to recognize the room. Then he did. Their living room, and the woman standing in it, Essie. She was holding a small black camera, about the size of a matchbox. She positioned it carefully between 2 books on the built-in shelf. Books William had owned since Morehouse. Books he never moved. She stepped back, checked the angle, adjusted by half an inch, stepped back again, and smiled. William's hands found the steering wheel. His knuckles drew tight. The second clip was audio, a recorded phone call. Later, reviewing the file metadata, William would understand that Essie had kept audio logs of her own operational calls as a matter of network procedure. In that moment, he only knew that he was listening to a voice he recognized immediately. The way you recognize a sound you've been hearing your whole life. Marcus Reed. He trusts me completely, Essie said it light and easy. Marcus answered, "That's exactly why I picked him." Then they both laughed, unhurried, comfortable, like men discuss football picks. William's mind went backward without his permission. Marcus at a bar on Edgewood Avenue, arm around William's shoulder, toasting the first seven-figure contract. Marcus at Evelyn's funeral, real tears, whispering, "Whatever you need, brother." 4 years of Sunday dinners, 4 years of the particular ease of someone who has known you long enough to stop performing. He held that for exactly 4 seconds. Then he set it down. He opened the subfolder labeled Assets, Kane. It was thorough. Quarterly revenue for 3 years. The appraised value of the Springdale Road property. 2 retirement accounts with current balances. A life insurance policy with its payout figure. And there, specific, impossible, clearly inside knowledge, the details of a $4.2 million pharmaceutical distribution contract William had renewed with a hospital network in Savannah the previous spring, an agreement that had never been announced publicly. He stared at that line for a long moment. Then he thought about a pattern he had never identified as a pattern until now. How often he'd talked about work at dinner. How Essie would ask thoughtful questions. How he had experienced those questions as interest. William Kane had made the mistake most trusting people make. He'd confused being listened to with being loved. He opened the spreadsheet's final tab, Insurance Payout Timeline. One line read, Original plan interrupted by natural causes. Adjust for new target. Below it, a name had been typed and then struck through. Evelyn Harper Kane. The rain outside changed character. It stopped being weather. It became the sound of 12 years of grief reorganizing itself around a fact he had never had before. He called Victor Hale. Victor was 52. Former federal financial investigator, a man William had known since his father introduced them during William's sophomore year at Morehouse. He picked up on the second ring. That told William he hadn't been sleeping. "I found the USB," William said. A long pause, then, "Where are you?" "Garage." Another pause. "William." Victor exhaled slowly. "After the wedding, I ran a background check on Essie. What I found didn't match. Employment history, an address that didn't resolve. I ran it twice to be sure." His voice dropped. "But you were happy, Will. For the first time since Evelyn. You were finally happy. And I told myself I could be wrong, that I didn't want to be the man who took that from you." The line was quiet. "Victor, I know. I was wrong to stay silent. I'm sorry." William hung up. He sat with that for a while. He thought about a particular kind of love, the kind that protects your present by gambling with your future, that keeps a painful truth quiet because it cannot bear to watch you hurt again. He understood it. That didn't make it cost less. When Essie returned from Charlotte Sunday afternoon, William was at the kitchen table with a coffee mug and the unhurried expression of a man who had spent a quiet weekend at home. He smiled when she came in, asked about the conference, listened while she described a panel she'd moderated for 20 minutes. She mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd run into an acquaintance of his from Chicago at the hotel bar, someone who'd asked a lot of questions about William's company. "Small world," William said. He did not sleep that night. He went back to the laptop. He opened a tab labeled Profiles. 8 names, 8 photographs, 8 men, all accomplished, all professionally established, all photographed in the quiet confidence of people who have built something real. Beside each name, asset values, relationship timelines, projected transfer dates, all of them introduced through charity events or community fundraisers, all of them reached through someone they already trusted. William's entry was labeled Target 9. Next to it, a single note. Weakness. Daughter Zuri. Strained relationship after father remarried too quickly. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark with both hands on the steering wheel and felt the full shape of it settle into his chest.
This had never been about a marriage. It had been a selection. They had studied him, identified his wound, and designed an approach around the specific geometry of his loneliness. Everything he had given, the trust, the house, the years, had been received by people who were taking inventory. A moment later, he reopened the laptop. There was one file he had not yet opened. A subfolder inside. Profiles. Labeled with a date from 8 months ago. Inside it, a single surveillance photograph. His daughter Zuri. In her gray blazer, carrying a portfolio, walking into a glass-front office building on Peachtree Road in Buckhead. William sat back. His breath left his body in a long, slow exhale. And for the first time that night, he was not certain of anything at all. 8 men before William, All of them targeted through someone they already called a friend. Here's the question I need you to sit with for a moment. If your closest friend had introduced you to someone, and you later discovered he had been paid to do it, would you ever truly forgive him? Type 1. Yes. Remorse and friendship can survive almost anything. Type 2. No. There are lines that cannot be uncrossed, no matter what. Or tell me below, has someone you trusted ever made a decision about your life without telling you, and you only found out later? He thought he understood the full shape of the betrayal. But Zuri's photograph in that folder meant one more conversation still had to happen before the picture was complete. William called Zuri the next morning. He kept his voice easy, the voice of a father calling his daughter for coffee, not the voice of a man who had spent the night staring at a photograph of her walking into a law office 8 months ago. He said he needed to go over something in person. Zuri didn't press him. "I'll be there at 10, she said, and hung up. He drove to Peachtree Road in Buckhead with the windows cracked. He needed the cold air. He needed something external to keep his mind level, because the part of him that had raised this woman from the time she was 12 years old, the part that had held her hand at her mother's funeral and watched her graduate and called her every weekend from the road, that part of him was having a very hard time with what the photograph implied. Attachment researchers describe a phenomenon called trust contamination, the experience of a foundational relationship suddenly becoming a source of uncertainty. It is particularly destabilizing in a parent-child bond because it doesn't only threaten trust in another person, it threatens the architecture of the self. William had built his emotional life around 2 certainties, Evelyn's memory and Zuri. One of them was sitting in a folder on a fraud operative's USB drive. He arrived first, got bad coffee from a machine in the hall, sat in the waiting room and tried to turn his suspicion into something that didn't feel like an accusation. Zuri walked in at 2 minutes past 10, gray blazer, leather portfolio under one arm. The composed, watchful expression she'd been carrying since she was about 15, the expression that had always reminded William, with a specific and private ache, of her mother. She sat across from him, placed the portfolio on the table, looked at him steadily. "You found the compartment," she said, not a question. William set down his coffee. "Tell me everything." Zuri opened the portfolio and laid documents in front of him in deliberate order. Clean, tabbed by section, organized the way she did everything. She began. 2 years ago, when William was hospitalized following a cardiac event, she had handled a stack of paperwork he'd signed without reading. Routine power of attorney documentation, standard for incapacitated patients who needed someone to manage their affairs during recovery. William had trusted her with the signing. He had not asked to see the individual instruments. Zuri, working quietly with the family attorney and under the guidance of a letter Evelyn had left with a trusted advisor,
had used the limited authority in those documents to establish a revocable trust. Before the power of attorney expired, Kane Family Cold Logistics had been transferred into that trust, with Zuri as sole trustee. Any major transaction, sale, transfer, substantial encumbrance, required her written authorization. She looked at her father across the table. "I knew you'd be upset," she said. "I also knew it was the right thing to do." Whatever Essie had planned, it rested on one assumption, that the company was Williams to sign away. It wasn't. Behavioral economists call this a silent circuit breaker, a safeguard built into a system precisely to activate when pressure is highest, when the person it protects is least able to protect themselves. Zuri had not acted to undermine her father's authority. She had acted to preserve what he had built at a moment when he could not watch over it himself. She had used the resources he gave her, his trust, his signature on documents he didn't read, to do the one thing he could not do from a hospital bed. She had stood guard. William stared at the documents for a long time. The relief was real. So was something more complicated. A deep, bewildering grief that his 26-year-old daughter had been carrying this alone. While he had been pouring coffee and believing in his marriage, she had been standing silently between him and ruin. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Zuri's hands folded in her lap. She took that long, slow breath, the one he recognized, the one that meant she had been holding something for a while and was finally ready to set it down. "Because Mom told me not to. Not until it became necessary." A pause. "She also told me one other thing. Twice, so I would remember it exactly." She looked at her father. "If your father ever repaints that room, take the painting down and look behind it." The room was very quiet. Grief researchers use the term continuing bonds to describe the ways the dead remain present in the living, not as haunting, but as guidance. Evelyn had looked at the man she loved and understood that his greatest quality, his capacity to trust completely, to need home so deeply that loneliness could make him stop asking questions, was also his greatest exposure. She couldn't fix that, but she could build something around it, and she had asked their daughter at age 12 to help her maintain it. Zuri, at 12 and at 18 and at 26, had never once let it fall. William pressed his thumb and forefinger against his eyes for a moment. Evelyn had not suspected Essie specifically. She couldn't have. But she had understood, with the clear-eyed practicality of someone who spent the last months of her life paying attention to what mattered, that her husband's loneliness would eventually make him vulnerable to someone. She had not known who. She had simply made sure the damage would be limited. After Zuri left, William sat in the parking lot with the engine idling. He thought about the 12-year-old girl at Evelyn's funeral, absolutely still, holding his hand with a grip too steady for a child who had just lost her mother. He had thought at the time that she was being brave for him. He understood now that she had already been given a job. He drove home. He was reaching into the refrigerator for water when his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A sequence of digits that rotated, the kind that could not be traced. He opened it. The message read, "Don't trust your daughter. I know she's watching. She's on our side." The phrasing was unmistakable. A specific construction, a pattern William had been reading for 20 years. Marcus had called his old college friends the Side since their freshman year at Morehouse. Every in-group they'd been part of, a study group, a flag football team, a prayer circle at homecoming, had been our side. William set his phone face down on the counter. In psychology, this tactic is called triangulation, the strategic introduction of suspicion between a target and their primary support system. It is precision work, not cruelty. Its purpose is to make the target destroy their own guardrails from the inside, so the manipulator never has to dismantle them directly. Marcus had studied William's life carefully enough to know exactly where to aim. The distance from Zuri, the guilt of remarrying too quickly, the quiet fear that she had never truly forgiven him. He had tried to use those wounds as a lever. William stood in his kitchen in the silence of his own house and felt a specific kind of fear settle into his chest.
Not the fear of a man who has discovered a crime. Something quieter and, in its own way, more permanent. The recognition that a person he had loved like a brother had been sitting across from him at Sunday dinners for 4 years, knowing exactly what was being constructed around him. Had looked at the most private wound in William's life and listed it in a spreadsheet as a tool. He turned off the kitchen light. He sat down in the dark living room while the Atlanta rain started again outside, slow and steady over the Springdale Road oaks. After a long while, he spoke to the empty room. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "you knew all of this long ago, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. He had thought this was a betrayal between a husband and a wife. What he was about to discover was that it had always been something far larger than a marriage, and far older than the day he said his vows. Essie had already been arrested. That detail matters. When William walked into the conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street in Buckhead on that Thursday morning in November, it was not an ambush. Essie knew exactly why she was there. She had been charged 3 days earlier, and her attorney had advised her to come, to listen, to evaluate the scope of what the federal investigators had assembled, and to decide, with full information, whether she was going to cooperate. The cooperation meeting. That's what the federal investigator named Price called it. A procedural courtesy, he said, offered to defendants whose full testimony could dismantle something larger than a single case. The sky outside the windows was flat and gray. Atlanta held its breath. There were 6 people at the table. William, Zuri, 7 months along now, her hands folded in her lap, her posture impeccable. Victor Hale, the family attorney, Price, and a man William had never met before, mid-50s, quietly dressed. He had driven down from Chicago that morning and introduced himself as Gerald Whitmore, former real estate developer, south side of Chicago. He had lost his company, his savings, and his home in the 18 months following his wife's death, after meeting a woman at a nonprofit gala on Lakeshore Drive, whose name, it turned out, did not match any of her 3 passports. Essie entered with her attorney. She was composed, precise, wearing the black blazer she favored for professional settings. She took her seat across from William and did not flinch. Her eyes moved around the room, one calibrating scan corner to corner, and then settled on William with an expression that was almost tender. She had always known how to compress a room down to just the 2 of them. Make every other person in it feel like background. Forensic psychologists who study financial fraud consistently identify one defining characteristic of its most effective practitioners. They do not simply lie, they construct. They build a complete emotional environment in which the target feels seen, specifically chosen, and uniquely safe. The target never falls in love with a person. They fall in love with a mirror, a reflection of themselves, idealized and finally understood. This is why exposure is so disorienting. It is not merely the betrayal of a relationship. It is the collapse of an identity the target had only just learned to inhabit. Victor opened the evidence binder without ceremony. He presented methodically, without drama, letting the documents carry the weight. The 3 passports and their 3 different names. The spreadsheet. The video of Essie positioning the surveillance camera in the living room bookshelf. The audio logs. Her own recordings of her own operational calls. Standard network procedure,
which had become the most straightforward evidence in the entire case. The partially executed asset transfer documents that would have made Essie a co-signatory on Kane Family Cold Logistics. Documents that were legally inert, every one of them, because of the revocable trust established 24 months earlier.
12 pages in, Marcus Reed's photograph appeared beside a wire transfer receipt. The payment had come from an account registered to one of Essie's aliases, dated 6 weeks before the Buckhead Charity Gala, where Marcus had introduced Essie to William. $45,000. 4 years of friendship, dinners, phone calls, genuine laughter, and it had carried a price. William had known this since the garage. Seeing it printed on paper in a federal evidence binder converted the knowledge into something that lived differently in the body. He acknowledged it, felt its full weight, and set it aside. There was still work to do. Sociologists call this approach community infiltration, the deliberate exploitation of existing trust networks to bypass the instincts that would otherwise protect a target. We extend trust more readily to people who arrive endorsed by someone we love. That is not a flaw. It is the mechanism by which belonging functions. Predatory networks target it precisely because it is a strength, because disabling it would require a person to stop trusting everyone, which is a cost most healthy people rightly refuse to pay. Marcus Reed was not merely a friend who betrayed William. He was a structural component of the scheme, the bridge that allowed an outsider to enter a man's life as if she had always belonged there. Marcus had not attended. His attorney had advised against it. Essie's attorney leaned over and whispered something to her. Essie gave one small nod, almost imperceptible. Her composure was still in place, but William had spent 3 years learning her face, and he could see the calculation running behind it. She was still measuring angles, still deciding which version of herself to present. And then Gerald Whitmore spoke. He had told Victor before the meeting that he was there only as a witness. He hadn't planned to address anyone directly. But when Victor finished and the room settled into its particular silence, the kind that comes after a verdict has been delivered but not yet spoken aloud, Gerald straightened in his chair and turned to look at Essie. "I want to say something," he said. His voice was steady, but it cost him. Everyone in the room could hear that it cost him. "I heard that recording," he said. "The one where you say, 'He's old. One more signature and it's done.'" He paused for a moment that felt very long. "You used that same line on me, word for word." "I know, because I had buried my wife 4 months before you said it. And when I heard it on that recording, I remembered it like it had been said yesterday." He held her gaze for one more moment. "I want you to know that I heard you say it. And I want you to know that I survived it. And so did he." Trauma therapists call this narrative reclamation, the act of standing before the person who reduced you to a case number and insisting, out loud, in front of witnesses, on your own survival. It does not undo the loss, but it ends the silence that keeps the wound from closing. Gerald Whitmore had not driven from Chicago to prosecute anyone. He had come because he needed to be in the room where it was finally named, and to name himself that he had outlasted it. The room held its silence. A tightening around Essie's jaw, a brief lowering of the eyes, just enough. Everyone at the table saw it. She knew they did. Here is the lesson that no spreadsheet could have calculated. Every scheme built on manufactured intimacy depends on one load-bearing assumption: that the target's capacity for loyalty will outlast the weight of the evidence. Essie had designed her approach around William's greatest quality, his willingness to trust completely, to love without reservation, to believe in the person he had chosen. She had used his best feature as the instrument of his own undoing. What she had not accounted for was that genuine love, the kind tested by grief and kept anyway, does not blind a man forever.
It only extends the time before he finally sees. And when he finally sees, he sees everything. She turned to William. When she spoke, her voice carried the softness she used when she wanted to make the room disappear. William, you love me. Whatever these documents say, you know what we... You installed a camera pointed at the front door, William said. Quiet, level, a statement of fact. In that recording, you tell Marcus the camera was there to see if my daughter came around. He placed one page from the binder in front of her. The video still. Essie in profile, adjusting the camera in the bookshelf. That small, private smile on her face. The timestamp. You were watching my child, he said. You called that protecting me. He stood. He buttoned the top button of his jacket, the unhurried gesture of a man who is finished with something. He turned to Zuri, extended his hand. She took it without hesitation. They stood together for one moment. Then they walked to the door. The last sound in that conference room, before the door clicked shut, was the quiet, even rhythm of William's footsteps. Outside on Peachtree Street, the Atlanta rain had returned, fine and steady, drawing thin lines down the glass storefronts. William and Zuri stood under the building's overhang together. Neither spoke for a while. The city moved around them, a cab, an umbrella folding inside out in the wind, the distant thump of a delivery truck. William stood in the middle of all of it with his daughter's hand in his, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could easily count, like himself. He had protected his company, named the scheme, and walked out standing. But the moment that would finally return him to himself was still waiting, quietly, on the back of a painting on Springdale Road. It was 3 weeks after the cooperation meeting, a Saturday in late November, the first genuinely cold morning of the year, when William finally went back to the office. By then, the legal framework had largely settled into place. Essie had accepted a reduced federal sentence of 9 to 11 years in exchange for dismantling the network from the inside. Names, accounts, the complete operational structure. Marcus Reed had lost his financial advisor's license and been ordered to pay restitution. The company had not lost a single contract. William's operations manager, Carl, had called the day the sentencing was announced and said simply, "Boss, we knew something was going on. We're glad you're all right." William had thanked him and hadn't said much else. That felt right. The back office had been stripped and replastered. The hidden cameras were gone. The compartment behind the wall had been sealed. The room smelled of fresh paint, the same soft white he'd used throughout the house, clean and unburdened. He had the locks on the room rekeyed, a small gesture that felt more meaningful than it probably should have. He retrieved the Piedmont Park painting from where it had leaned against the hallway wall since October. He carried it into the room, held it up against the freshly painted wall, and turned it over to check the hanging wire before putting it back. There was a piece of paper taped to the back of the frame. He almost missed it. Old paper, cream-colored, its texture softened slightly with age. The tape was dry and yellowed at the edges, the kind that had been in place for years. Placed there carefully, against the frame, in a spot that would never be visible from the front. William peeled it off with both hands, the way you handle something you already know is irreplaceable. The handwriting was Evelyn's, faded pencil. He would have known it anywhere. "William, if our daughter found this, it means she did what I asked her to do. Don't be angry with her for keeping secrets from you. She was 12 years old when I asked her to remember, and she carried it all the way. Forgive her. She loves you the only way she knows how. Quietly, from behind the scenes, making sure you're safe before she lets you see her hands. She got that from you. Love her the way she deserves. She has been standing watch for a long time. Evelyn." William sat down on the floor,
His back went against the wall, the way it had in October when his legs stopped working. He sat there with the note held flat in both hands, and he cried. Not the careful, composed kind. The other kind. The kind that has been waiting long enough that when it finally comes, it sounds almost like relief. He cried for Evelyn, who had spent the last months of her life paying attention to the people she loved and quietly building protection she would never see used. He cried for Zuri, who had been 12 and grieving, and had still kept her mother's instructions intact for 14 years, without asking for acknowledgement or thanks. And he cried, finally and fully, for himself, for the loneliness that had made him accessible, for the grief that had quietly become a door, for all the years between the death of one woman he had loved completely and the discovery that the second one had never existed. After a while, the crying stopped. He sat with the note in the stillness of the white room. Then he stood, walked to his bedroom, and opened his wallet. He slid Evelyn's note carefully into the bill compartment, behind his driver's license, in the slot closest to his body, where he would feel it every day. He went back to the office. He hung the painting in its original place. He stepped back and looked at it. The soft greens of Piedmont Park, the shimmer of the lake on a spring afternoon, painted by a woman who had understood everything and loved him through it anyway. For the first time in longer than he could count, he smiled. A real one. The kind that takes something from you and gives something back in the same motion. He had been through the loss and the discovery and the legal process, and he had come out the other side, still standing. But the truest part of the story, the part about what a family becomes when it chooses to, was only just beginning. Some things about William Kane did not change. He still made black coffee every morning, 2 cups, no sugar, same as always. He still wore his old khaki work pants on Saturdays. He still waved to Mr. Dupree, the gardener who had worked the Springdale Road property for 9 years and who returned every greeting with the same mild, philosophical nod. The nod of a man who has made his peace with the world and found it a reasonable arrangement. And he called Zuri every evening. Not every few days, every evening, without announcement or ceremony. Asked how she was feeling, whether the baby was active, whether she was keeping up with her iron. Zuri teased him about becoming a pregnancy expert. He told her he had a lot of years of inattention to make up for. She laughed, a full, unguarded laugh, the kind she hadn't given him in a long time. And he held on to it, the way you hold on to something warm when the morning is cold. 6 months after the sentencing, on a Saturday in late April, Zuri came to the house on Springdale Road. She brought her husband James, and the careful, deliberate way she moved now, conscious of the weight she was carrying, in every sense of that phrase. They sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and the particular kind of conversation that only happens between people who have survived something together and are still learning the language for it. "Dad," Zuri said, wrapping both hands around her mug, "I'm sorry I kept it from you. All of it. The trust, the compartment, all of it. I know it wasn't fair." William looked at his daughter across the table. He took a moment, not because he was uncertain, but because he wanted to say it correctly. "Your mother gave you a job when you were 12 years old," he said, "and you carried it for 14 years without dropping it, without asking anyone to acknowledge it." He paused. "You didn't keep a secret from me, Zuri. You kept a promise to your mother. And because you kept it, I still have a company. I still have a home." He looked at her. "You didn't do a single thing wrong. Your mother taught you well." Zuri pressed her lips together. Her eyes went bright. She gave one small nod, the nod of someone who has needed to hear a thing for a very long time and is, finally, letting themselves receive it.
James quietly covered her hand with his. The three of them sat in the April light coming through the kitchen window, and for a few minutes, no one needed to say anything at all. They talked about Evelyn that afternoon. Really talked about her. Not the careful, around-the-edges way you talk about someone whose absence is still too raw, but openly, with stories. The way she could burn toast and still make the best biscuits anyone had ever tasted. The way she hummed to herself while balancing the household accounts, like arithmetic was a kind of music. The expression on her face at the closing of William's first major contract, standing off to the side in a conference room on Peachtree Street, wearing her good blue dress, watching him sign. Not pride exactly, something deeper, certainty, the look of a woman who had always known. Before Zuri left, she stood for a moment in the doorway of the back office and looked at the Piedmont Park painting. She was something else, she said quietly. Yeah, William said. She was. After they were gone, William stood at the front window as the Atlanta afternoon turned golden. Light came through the oak leaves in long, easy slants. Down the block, he could hear children on bicycles, that particular sound that belongs to no specific decade, that has been the sound of Saturday afternoons in American neighborhoods since before anyone living can remember. He thought about what Evelyn had truly left behind. Not the trust or the compartment or the careful architecture of protection. Those were the means. What she had left behind was Zuri, a young woman who loved with maturity and responsibility, who had learned to guard without controlling, to act from behind the scenes and never ask to be thanked. And a man who was, finally, paying attention. He reached into his jacket pocket, felt the fold of the note in his wallet. Guard your heart, he thought, but let the people who truly love you help guard it too. He turned from the window and looked at the painting, the soft greens, the shimmer of the lake, the spring afternoon Evelyn had spent with a brush while their daughter ran circles in the yard. He smiled at it. The real kind. The kind that costs something and gives something back. This story teaches us one specific thing. Grief is the door that fraudsters walk through. Not because grieving people are foolish, but because loneliness creates urgency, and urgency makes us skip the questions we would otherwise ask. So here is what this story actually asks you to do. Before you sign anything a new partner places in front of you, anything, call the child or the sibling or the old friend who knew you before the loss. Not to ask permission, just to say, read this with me. One phone call. That's the whole ask. And if someone in your life is newly widowed and moving fast towards someone new, don't stay silent out of respect for their happiness. Sit with them on the porch. Ask the quiet questions, the ones a real friend asks. William's first wife couldn't protect him in person, so she built something that could. The people who love you are still trying to do the same. Written by a human with AI as companion. It hopes to leave you with a warm feeling that even when wrongly treated or looked down upon, there are still people and good things quietly standing on your side. Production team. Story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.